Hi and welcome to the 10th Mailbox. This is where I take some viewer responses from various formats, although it's all from YouTube this week, and give more detailed responses, or maybe there's lots of themes, and I may be able to respond on YouTube itself or wherever, but maybe not in as much detail as I would like, or maybe I just didn't get around to replying to it at all. I get a lot of comments. This week I've had a bucket load of comments, a lot of them of course relating to, in particular, I suppose, the exorcist video. That sort of video is always going to get sort of strong opinions both ways. So there'll be a few tackling that, but I've tried to do a mix of different themes in it as well. So I'm not just focusing on one topic. So the first one says, any plans on doing some more comparison ideas from other MMO videos similar to the player housing one? Yes, I had talked some time ago, actually, when I was busy playing a little bit of Elder Scrolls Online. This is going back now a few months, if we're honest. I said it would be quite good to counterpoint World of Warcraft with Elder Scrolls Online. These are both games that are very strong in the MMO world. They're both doing really well. They both get a lot of plaudits. And it'd be quite interesting to compare, say, how they both go around travel, how they both go around questing, how they both go around professions, that sort of thing. So I will be doing a series of videos on those. They were sort of put on the back burner as like a usual thing, low priority. I always have this list of videos I want to do. It's huge, by the way. But there's some that get a bit more urgent than others. This is the sort of one I could bring out at any time. So there will be plans to do that. My plan at the moment is to do it the week after next. Next week I want to do like the beginner WoW series and try that out. And there's also, obviously, I want to do some stuff on pack. At the moment, I'm desperate to be talking about stuff that, like speculation on the future thing, but some of that speculation relies upon some knowledge of what's going to go on Argus. I'm going to do a series of videos on those. Obviously they'll have the spoiler tag in it because it's going to be laden with spoilers, so there's that next week as well, which means the comparison one is planned for the week after next. Next one, this was about the anchor. I did a video yesterday on a blacksmithing made anchor that has popped up on the PTR. Very strange thing. You tie this to your legs and it drags you down to the ocean depths quite quickly. There was a few people who were hinting at this. Says, I think this makes it obvious that the next X-Pack is going to involve a lot of underwater stuff. Now, obviously, I think I'm in the position where I could bet very precious things that it's Old Gods related. And before even Legion, I was given that impression. But yeah, when you start to think that, and I don't want to go into spoilers, but we need new zones. With any new expansion, we need new zones. If it's going to be on Azeroth, and it should be on Azeroth, and I'm pretty sure it is on Azeroth, then we're sort of running out of new zones that we can access. So a lot of people, very sensibly, and I am of this opinion as well, because the only thing that makes sense is very much a South Seas type expansion related to the Old Gods. So I don't want there to be underwater zones like Vashir again. And if there is, I hope there's only one. But there is a strong indication that there could be. And as people said, this might be a bit of an indicator. Now, that being said, some people were saying we're going to need this in the next expansion. We obviously wouldn't use this one. You'll notice the name, Fellslate Anchor. Made from Fellslate. Obviously, whatever we use, let's say there were some underwater bits to next expansion, there would presumably be one that we can craft with next expansion's raw materials as well. We're obviously not going to have to go to old zones just to get Fellslate for it. But it is potentially, like someone suggested, it was an Easter egg. Maybe it is a not so subtle hint. Who knows? Because yeah, it's difficult to think of why something like this would suddenly appear more than halfway through an expansion. Next one. This was to do with the player housing video I did, and someone saying found this sadly late from Haven Games. Haven Games, for those who don't know, was unfortunately someone who did very interesting World of Warcraft videos. A fellow Paladin player, like myself, but unfortunately passed away earlier on this year. But yeah, he did a video some time ago with some footage from Alpha Playhouse. He used to do a few things like that in terms of what was planned. It is very interesting researching what Blizzard, just in general, what Blizzard said about World of Warcraft while it was being developed, when it had only just come out, and the sort of things they say now, you can certainly tell there's been a huge shift in philosophy. But the point of this video was that indeed Blizzard were intending to put player housing in the game when World of Warcraft was going live. It was one of those things that, a bit like my videos sometimes, that get pushed down the priority list because there's always more urgent things to do, which is fair enough. But their attitude to them seemed to shift a few years later. And this is what we've had probably for the last 10 years now. Certainly the last 8 or 9 years, their attitude towards it has not been, yes, we'd like to do it, but we can't say when, because that was their early attitude. Their attitude now is, we don't think it's a good idea. Some reasons cited have been things like, oh, we don't really want to put something in that takes people away from the outer world. But again, as I was talking in that video, it doesn't do that. And it's not just a theoretical thing. I can argue from a theoretical point of view how it actually is going to encourage people to go out in the world, which might be a paradox to some people, but it's not. Because in order to get furnishings for your place, you've got to go out and actually get these things. There was I can't remember who it was. There was a big Hollywood actor once, a very successful one, who had this gorgeous, luxurious, like, to say house would be putting it down, because it had on a huge area of land as well. It was almost like an island home, but I don't think it was on an island, but it was a huge area, luxury, wall-to-wall luxury, like square miles of land and all the rest of it. And the story goes that he had a visitor, and this visitor said to him, if I lived here, if this was my home, I'd never leave. And the actor who owned it said to this guy, if I never left, I wouldn't be able to afford it. And it'd be a similar thing with player housing. You can't just sit in there all day, because if there's actually things to do with it, to customize, you've got to go out and get the things to get the customizing for. And the other thing, but that's a theoretical thing you can argue, it doesn't work in practice. So what does work in practice? Well, you look at games that have player housing, and then you go to their main hub areas, the areas where players congregate. Are these things desolate? No, they're not. They're packed with players. Elder Scrolls Online, Star Wars The Old Republic, even Lord of the Rings Online, which doesn't have that many players these days. If you go level to one of the hubs, the level cap hubs, the new place where people are supposed to congregate with each expansion, there are players there. There are plenty of players there. And very active in the world chat as well. That is very noticeable. So this simply doesn't exist in those games. This idea that people just go to their house and stay there all the time doesn't exist. Existed with the Garrison, but that's not a player house. But more on that with a comment later. Next one. This was to do with the 11-week cycle, the fact that every patch in Legion has come out 11 weeks after the previous one. Very interesting, but there's a very, very strong suggestion. I did a video about this, that this may not be the case with the next one. We don't know, of course, until it actually comes out, or at least until it's announced. But there is a super strong suggestion it might be a little bit earlier this time, potentially significantly earlier, maybe a couple of weeks earlier, which would be very significant with an 11-week cycle. Someone was saying if they do push this patch out sooner, it would probably line up nicely with 7.3.5, which presumably would include the Argus raid, coming out a little bit before BlizzCon. So then they would be set up to talk about the next patch and or expansion at BlizzCon. Just my speculation. It could, but I don't think it will. My concern with the thing is, when they have BlizzCon, the developers are doing nothing for the few days before it and the few days after it, because they're getting ready for BlizzCon. It's a major undertaking and they've got to prepare for it. So it's not ideal bringing out a new raid just before BlizzCon, even if it's like a week before. Because as we've seen in Tomb of Sargeras, if there's things that need tuning, that's them working a lot. They're doing a lot of work behind the scenes at times like that to try and fix the situation. They're not really going to risk bringing out a raid just before BlizzCon during the period of time when they're likely to have to do, if there are going to be needed changes, a lot of those changes. So I think after BlizzCon would be better. But again, I don't know. Who knows? Next one. This was talking about my ideas for new leveling content to be more beginner friendly, shall we say. And I was talking about storylines, a quest chain that you could just follow from level 1 all the way to level cap, that would explain all the major storylines in the game, because the issue is you start off on storylines in any expansions, leveling content, and you don't get to the end of them. And it's not that you don't get to the end of them just because you out-level that content and go to the next one, because that happens too. It's because the story concludes in endgame, in the raids, which you don't do while you're leveling. So my idea was for a new quest chain that runs all the way through it, that explains all of these while you're leveling. Someone here said, instead of quest chains, why not scenarios to end of each old X-Pack? In actual fact, that was my thought. I didn't go through all of my fleshed out ideas, I have to say, for the beginning zones, because then it would have been about an hour long. And a lot of people don't like hour-long videos. So I cut out a lot of the detail of what I was saying. But it was my intention that these quest chains end up with a scenario that replaces the raid content, so to speak. Not a copy of the raid content, but, you know, because my vision of it, I can't remember the words now, was that you're sort of a shadowy character. You're sort of not part of the group of heroes that takes down this raid boss, but you're helping in some way. You're an auxiliary helper with that. So you have a slightly different story arc that takes you parallel with it, and that there could be a scenario there that allows you to witness, nonetheless, all of this stuff going on. A little bit, you could, I suppose, a little bit like where you see the party of people defeating Van Cleef in the newer version of Deadmines when Vanessa Van Cleef's doing her nut. That sort of thing, where it sort of shows you that group of heroes, you know, or like a custom-made group of heroes defeating it. That being said, it wouldn't have to be a scenario, but that was my original thought, because that would work well with it. Absolutely agree with that. Next one, it says, can't wait for 7.3. My guild is really struggling on Heroic Avatar, and that will surely allow us to get it down. DPS required is kind of silly in my opinion. We're killing 7 bosses in a bit over 2 hours, and then wipe for 8 hours on Avatar with barely any progression. Now, obviously there will be issues around this, just the DPS. It'll, you know, with Avatar, it'll likely be the management of the boss's energy and the health of the maiden, I'm sure. But just going aside from that, it is a DPS check, and absolutely 7.3 will help with that, because with the Netherlight Crucible, you will, if your artifact level is anything relatively decent, you will immediately increase your artifact level, the level of your weapon, the item level of it, will just instantly go up, which means your item level of your character will instantly increase a little bit as well. And that's to say nothing of the extra abilities you may get. So just with the Netherlight Crucible alone, for which there's some questing required to get it, don't expect to get this first day unless you're someone who's able to log on really early and spend the day doing the questing, in which case, of course, you can get it. For example, when this thing comes out, if it comes out actually in the next few weeks, then I will be able to do that because I'll still be on holiday. But if not, then I'll be at work and I won't be able to do that before the first raid, for example. So I'll be stuck on that until the weekend, realistically. But yeah, that will certainly be possible. It will increase your power. Just like the new artifact traits increased our power in 7.2.5. And you know, there's been various things throughout Legion where suddenly our power has increased significantly. I mean, getting the 52 points for the Concordance increased your power significantly. And it would be a way to nerf those bosses, whether it's on Heroic or Mythic. Absolutely true that, you know, because there's been a lot of nerfs on those bosses already. Now, a lot of those nerfs were because they overtuned them, of course, although more about that very soon. But I think a better way than constantly nerfing it is to let gear, to buff us, basically, as opposed to just nerfing the content all the time. It looks a bit better, doesn't it, than constantly nerfing it, because it just makes them look a little... You expect a couple of tuning nerfs. Tuning nerfs are fine, but you should only really have a couple of those in a tier, if that. You have one tuning nerf that comes after the really top guilds have killed stuff, and then you have another one for when there looks like there's a bottleneck, you know, and that's usually a few months into it. That's what we had in Nighthold. It's not what we're getting into with Sargeras, is it? Now, speaking of this, so when I was talking about the Exhausted video, there are a number of comments people picked up on, so we're going to go through a few of those now. One of them was related to the length of time. Now, I mentioned in the video that there was a time when bosses simply were tuned too highly to be able to defeat them with the gear you would have when you first got to that boss. So there was nothing for it. You'd have to farm the place for a few more weeks, get gear off the other bosses, the bosses you had on farm. Then you'd get enough gear to just push yourself over that DPS check. That was standard. But that is not the way it works now. I am going to do a video on that. I alluded to it on Friday. Sometime next week I'll be doing a video on the differences between, you know, in terms of gear, in terms of how well prepared we are for fights these days. There's a totally different dynamic. So comparing it to, say, TBC and Wrath isn't very relevant, but this was the most eloquent version of this comment that I could find. But I'll just throw in a comment here from Exorcist, what Exorcist said when they were talking about this after they finally killed Jaden. And there's now 5 guilds that have done that. They were saying that their item level was, their average item level in their guild was equal to the item level of the gear that Avatar drops. So, and that didn't used to be the case. Okay, item level as such didn't exist in TBC and Wrath. Oh, we got gear skill, but that was an add-on. That was a, you know, well, nothing to do with Blizzard as such. But, you know, the concept of it existed. It's sort of an internal value that just wasn't revealed anyway. Your gear was never up to the level of the boss you were killing when you were killing it. So there was always benefit in farming more raid bosses to get better gear. Nowadays, your item level doesn't necessarily go up that much with each week's extra raid. The first couple it does for us, for those who are progressing more slowly. But for those who are already farming all their stuff in like Mythic Plus dungeons and stuff like that, not so much. So if they can't, they've already got basically the best gear in the game at the point they're killing it. You're very close to it. So if they're not gonna, not counting Titanforge, even though they'll have a number of pieces of Titanforge gear. Anyway, next one. So this was talking about scaling leveling content. And it says completely scalable content has severe disadvantages as people could twink and lock XP and then melt mobs that should require lots of times faster than a level 110 can due to how stats work on twinks for quick farming. There's a couple of things about this. The first is there would be no such thing as twinks if you had scaled leveling. The twink is when you lock the XP, as you say there, you lock that experience so you don't level anymore and you just build up more and more gear. And there was a similar effect on this at the start of Legion as well, because it was possible for you to get like 850 gear, BOE gear, that like at least 101 could wear. I'm not sure 100, but 101 at least. So you could get a level 101 character with a load of 850 gear, and they would absolutely destroy things. Destroy them. But, so yeah, the idea to... You ask yourself, why do you lock experience? The reason it's in the game, I'm not asking why people do it, but the reason it's in the game is so that you can enjoy the content of a particular expansion without out leveling it. That's what you do it for. That's why it's in the game. Whether that's why people do it is another matter. Now, if you've got completely scalable content, you don't need it for that. You can decide to spend as much time as you like in, say, Outland. It really doesn't matter because you'll scale to that level. So there's no longer any need to lock experience. So that won't actually be an issue. Next comment says, I love the idea of a guild hall. The account-wide storage is very unlikely to happen because so few items are bound to account. There's a lot of items bound. No, you don't need bound to account items. What am I talking about? This is for items, like the examples I gave in the video were things like flasks and potions, consumables would be the best use of it. It could also include crafting reagents that you want to share across characters. Let's say you have a miner, but you've got one character that's a blacksmith, another one that's an engineer, and they might both want to dip into your ore. Well, you can put it in there and then either one can take it. Yes, you can mail them around each other, but that's the hassle that this is designed to avoid. It says it would only be possible if Blizzard allowed trading across realms and merged all auction houses together. Otherwise, we'll just buy from wherever the things are cheapest, send it through the storage to our tunes on other realms. I think you've got... I didn't say anywhere that this would be cross-realm, just account-wide. It's like mailing. You can mail something instantly to any character on your account. You can't mail it to someone in another realm, though, even if it's on your account. So, yeah. I don't know where the suggestion came. Maybe I explained it poorly, but I'm not talking about this being accessible on characters on different realms. This is purely characters on the same realm or connected realms. But it's shared by all those characters on those realms is what I actually meant there. So yeah, that wouldn't stop it at all, because that's not how it would work. That's not how it works in any game that has got shared account storage, apart from Elder Scrolls Online, which doesn't have realms at all. But on any other game that has realms, that has account-wide storage, yeah, you can't access it from a character on another realm, of course. Next one. There were a few things about this. Now, this again was the Exorcist one. Now, there were a lot of comments from people, as I expected, and I said so in the video. I expected this because I've done several videos like this before, where you get people who express no sympathy at all. That's absolutely fine, by the way. If you say, I've got no sympathy for them because no one's forcing them to do it, fine. Or you've got no sympathy because they're playing a game at the end of the day, it's fine. Although most of us, let's be honest, if we look at most of our careers, it's largely playing a game anyway. Doesn't matter what job you do, almost. But there were some extraordinary comments, which I do feel I have to say, no. You can entirely entitled to your opinion. If you don't think they should have any sympathy, or they weren't hard done by anything like that, then that's fine. If it's just a gut feeling you have. But then when you go on to say something a bit mad, I have to point it out. Now, there were a few comments, which I'm not going to show here. I've got one showing at the moment. I'll come on to that. There were a few comments that were of the like of, well, it's not like they're curing cancer in Africa. And there was more than one comment like that, which I thought was curious. And I was scratching my head a bit, and I was thinking, so what you're saying is that unless you're curing cancer in Africa, you're not worthy of anyone's sympathy, or no one is worthy of your sympathy at any rate. That's a bit harsh. There can't be that many people curing cancer in Africa. And then I thought about it for another couple of seconds. I thought, I don't wish to disparage an entire continent here. But if I'm honest, I very much doubt that the world's leading biomedical research laboratories are actually in Africa. I've got a fair idea a lot of them will be in the United States, with maybe a few in Europe and Japan and China. I can't imagine there's an awful lot in Africa. So what you're now saying is, even if you are curing cancer, but it's not in Africa, even they're not worthy of your sympathy. You have got high standards. But anyway, on to this comment. So it says, I've got no sympathy for the World First Raiders. At that point, I'm thinking, that's fine. That's okay. And then it comes on to the usual, no one is forcing them to do this. It's just a game after all. So I'm thinking, how many people actually get forced to do anything? Most countries have outlawed slavery some time ago. So does that mean no one's deserving of sympathy? If someone walks down a street and gets mugged, are you going to turn around and say, well, they didn't have to walk down that street? And the idea I gave is, because game, I thought sport, it says nobody's forcing Formula 1 racers to race either, but if you leave oil on the track and then someone slides off and dies, it's not, okay, the dying bit was a bit extreme. It's not fair to say, well, nobody told them to drive at 200 miles an hour. And then he says, using an analogy and one as bad as this just shows you weak argument. I'll come on to that in a moment. It says, no one loses their life because a boss didn't die. Well, the life bit, okay, I tack that on. But that's not relevant. Actually, some people have lost their life playing World of Warcraft. It says, world first raiders know the risks. And guess what? So do Formula 1 drivers. Now, this is the point at which I'd respond to this and say, but that's the whole point. They didn't. Like a Formula 1 racer, they know that the marshals will keep the track clear. If there's oil on that track, the marshals will put the flags out. They'll get everyone to slow down. Either the safety car or the virtual safety car will come out. Everyone slows right down while the marshals deal with that situation. All right, while everyone is driving at a safe speed. The Formula 1 drivers know that. Now, let's say the marshals didn't do that one time and then someone did slide off it. You're saying Formula 1 drivers know the risk? No, they didn't, because something happened that they were not familiar with, that they did not expect. It's the same with these World First Raiders. They know in inverted commas this time. I hate doing that, by the way. They know that Blizzard are going to bring out a raid tier at a certain level. They know it's not going to be perfect because apart from anything else, the very last boss on Mythic mode they know is only internally tested. Which actually brings me to another point. Someone else said actually, oh, it's not like, you know, you've got to be fair to Blizzard. They don't have method quality raiders all testing this. It's like, yes, they do. They have a big team of internal testers, and these guys are good. You don't employ... Blizzard, like the king of MMO developers, does not employ rubbish players to internally test their stuff. These guys are awesome. These are really good at the game. And what's more, unlike Method, if Method look at something funny about the encounter, they can't go to the developers and say, oh, we noticed this funny thing. I mean, they can say, you've noticed this funny thing, but they can't then say to Blizzard, can you confirm that it's supposed to be like this? Because Blizzard might turn around and go, we're not going to tell you. Whereas these guys can, because they're working together. They're doing it internally in secret. There'll be a lot of information passing between the testing team and the developers. So, yeah, they do. But anyway, back to this one. So, they know that the content is going to be released at a certain standard. Yeah, the last boss there might be a few issues with. But everything else should be pretty bang on, and has been as well. This is the thing. It's not like, you know, they're being a bit naive because, oh, Nighthold was a shambles as well, and the previous one was a shambles, and the previous one, and so on going back. No, actually, the last few years' worth have actually been pretty good. There's been the odd bug, of course. You expect that. There's the odd tuning issue. But there's been nothing like this. This is not at the same standard. So they didn't understand the risks. They thought it was going to be brought out at a particular standard, and it wasn't. And the other thing is that even Blizzard aren't even denying that it's not come out at the right standard. Then there was this one. As a teacher, I have to come on to this one. This comes up now and then. I'm not trying to pick on this person, by the way, because, I mean, I may have even done it in the past. You do get... It is sometimes funny. On the internet, words take a different meaning. But I always feel if you're going to use a word, you should use it for what it actually means. But I'll give you a few examples. So it says, because I talked about the sacrifice these raiders make because some of them give up like careers in certain areas that wouldn't be conducive to raiding or whatever. It says misuse of the word sacrifice. And then I went on to answer, a sacrifice is when you give up something valuable for something you regard as more important, which is exactly what they do. And then he said in brackets, strictly by the dictionary definition, you are correct. It's like, what other definition is there? What if it's not in a dictionary? Where else are you going for your definitions? And then it says, though I stick by what I said in the computer, no sacrifice whatsoever. So they're saying, yes, you're right in terms of the dictionary definition, as if the dictionary definition is just one choice of ways to define a word. And it's like the whole point of words is to be understood, and the only way communication works to be understood is if everyone agrees on the meaning of a word. Now, yes, some words can have multiple meanings, sure. But we're both agreeing on the use of the word and he's still saying it's incorrect, even though it's... What? I don't know. But it does come to that. You get it in... you do get it in... Like, especially, I've noticed online. Like, I remember a few years ago, Preach was talking... This was at the beginning of MOP in beta. And he was on the rep pad and he was saying it was clunky. And I immediately went... No, I don't agree. Because I was in the beta as well. I was playing it as well. I said, I don't agree. And then I thought about it for a moment. I thought, does he mean clunky? And I have to confess, I had to look up the word clunky myself in the dictionary. And it is a word. It does exist. But it doesn't mean what he meant it to mean. You understood from the context what he meant it to mean. But it wasn't quite right. So I was also agreeing with his definition of the word, even though it's not true. But anyway, I do feel that if a word is going to be important, if you're going to say that someone's using the wrong word, then you should be right about that. But anyway, then the next one, this was hilarious. I love this comment. Method and Exhaustus, we have sacrificed everything. What have you given? Quite fitting the Legion theme, right? Yes, it is. But this comment, this is exactly the sort of comment I have no issue with at all. I don't agree with it, but I have no issue. They've just said no sympathy. They've not added any nonsense onto it to justify their lack of sympathy. But the interesting point to this is that Exhaust themselves, they're not even after sympathy. The reason they're criticising this thing is because they want Blizzard to do a better job next time. It's as simple as that. It's effectively feedback. It's just very public feedback. But anything they do or say is very public. Because idiots like me make videos about everything they do and say. Well, not everything. Important things. So, so that is ultimately what this is about. It's about feeding back to Blizzard, sort of saying to Blizzard, and maybe it wasn't the developers' fault. Maybe they just weren't given enough time. Maybe there were lots of complex issues that arose, and they had a very strict deadline. And unlike in the older days, because I would say Blizzard traditionally produced some really high standard of content, but then in the older days, it also could be argued that they were allowed to sort of delay things by a couple of weeks if that's what was needed to get it just right. Maybe this time it's been, no, we're going to stick to this schedule. The 11-week thing, for example. Right, last few. So, coming on to the player housing thing again. It's Garrisons with Blizzard's one chance to do player housing now. They blew it. Garrisons aren't player housing. I'm not quite sure why people equate Garrisons with player housing. Because if ever you say to someone, anyone, what do you think of player housing? Get them to write a list of the things they see in player housing. Not one of them is attributable to Garrisons. Not one. I can understand why at the time people might have saw Garrisons as a step towards player housing, because some of the technology you need was sort of there. You, for example, need the technology to be able to walk into a place and it be instanced to you, so that no one else can get in unless you give them permission. That sort of thing. That worked really well. So the idea, because it wasn't like an instance like a dungeon where you have to pass through a portal. That would be fine, by the way. And that was how it was originally intended to be, because the portal in Stormwind, for example, was well known that that was going to be where you get to player housing. But they've shown with the Garrison thing they don't need that. They've got better technology now. You could actually just have you fly and you'd suddenly appear in your correct neighborhood. So that would all be great. But in any other context, I don't understand why people think Garrisons was an attempt at player housing. There's zero customization possible with it. Next one. It says, I'm struggling to finding a way to compare against the top DPS people on a particular fight. I don't have another Shadow Priest in my raid to compare with. How do I do this? I sort of responded to this, but it's a good question. And the thing, it is tricky with logs, because you can't just you can't always directly compare, because, for example, even if you get a top player, you may, for example, look at them and think, are they doing the fight properly, or are they just trying to rank because it's easy farm for them now? Even if you can, you should always try and contact someone in the know on either forums or Discord or something like that. But what you actually compare, I'd look at it, break down bits of fights. So the first thing to compare is the opening gambit. Like, look at it for a fight where you start off with heroism and where you don't have to do a lot of mechanics in the first 30 seconds. So compare yourself there. Are you casting the same? Are your casts looking the same space of timing and so on? Potentially taking into account like different levels of haste and stuff like that. You know, are you using similar talents? If you're not using similar talents, is that because of gear? Is it that one talent suddenly becomes better with a certain level of gear and you're not quite that level? In which case, maybe don't look at such a high level player, maybe look at one a bit further down. You can usually find knowledgeable players at various, like in different specs. There'll be some knowledgeable players who are not even potentially raiding high level mythic. They might be, you know, just doing the first few mythic bosses or something. Not everyone raids in top end guilds because they can't give the time for that. Maybe they're spending so much time theory crafting that they don't have the time for that as well. But that's what I would do. Break it into parts of fight. So look at the initial burst first of all. Then if there's a situation where you need to switch your priority out, so you've got like 5 seconds to burst it down, look at that period of time. What abilities are they using at that period of time and so on. So that's how I would do that. And the last one says, you sound sick. You're some sort of wizard. This was 5 days ago. I was feeling fine 5 days ago. I have got a little bit of a sore throat coming on now though. Is this like a dog smelling cancer? You can detect illness 5 days hence. You need to get yourself into medicine if you're not already. So anyway, there we go. Those are this week's. They'll say there was a lot of comments this week, but I'll be doing this each week again. I mean, it's quite nice getting a lot of comments actually, but it does make it very difficult to have time to read them. It's just as well I'm off for summer. But until next time, I'll see you later.